Welcome to Wealth Builder Movement. I am so glad that you guys have joined us for another series episode of Wealth Builder. Today, we are talking banking, while black and brown, how to build, and of course, how to get inside the mind of a banker so that we can get greater access to capital, greater vetting abilities in terms of how to choose what's a worthy investment, and also how to build relationships that pay, whether that's with the bank or maybe even with a business partner. We will be right back after this commercial with our special guest, Pedro Bryant. I'll see you guys back in a second.
Welcome to Life Development Corporation. We develop lives by supporting the unsupported and building a brighter future for all. Founded by Reverend Timothy Finley Jr., Life Development Corporation focuses on the physical wellness, social health, intellectual education, financial stability, and political engagement of the most underserved in our communities. We support the hungry with food access initiatives like Blessings in a Basket and Thanksgiving food drives. And we also provide free medical services and basic needs to overlooked populations, as well as youth and young adults and adult educational training. We truly want to see everyone reach their highest level in life and be prepared for whatever career they choose. Because after all, everyone deserves an opportunity to grow and develop. That's why we focus on social justice, financial empowerment, and political engagement. Join us. We need your support. We can't do it alone, and we want you to help us support the unsupported.
Welcome back to the Wealth Builder Movement. I am here with Pedro Bryant, the Executive Vice President and Managing Director of Community Lending at Republic Bank. I'm so happy to have you here with us today. We are definitely going to be getting all inside your mind so we can think like you and build wealth. Pedro, I again, just want to welcome you here, but to kick off our Q&A for today, kick off our interview and just kind of understand, your mind, thought, and your process. I believe to understand where a person's coming from, you got to understand about where they came from. So can you talk to us a little bit about your past and how you worked your way up in the banking industry?
Yes, thank you, Angelique, and I'm delighted to be with you this evening. I grew up in a small town in southeast Georgia, and at the age of 16, I decided I wanted to be a banker. There were no bankers in my hometown who looked like me, and during career day of my sophomore year of college, I met the president of one of the banks in my hometown. I already knew him. I went home that afternoon and told my mother that I wanted to be a banker, and from that moment forward, I started planning for a career in banking.
Oh, wow, that's awesome. Now, I imagine planning for a career in banking, coming from a small town, how did you get into that industry? Because even nowadays in 2020, there's not a lot of us in the banking industry. And so how did you break into it? Who mentored you? Were there difficulties or opportunities that presented themselves along the way?
Well, after college, I decided I would go back home. My sister gave me an opportunity to live with her in Atlanta, but the cost of living with my sister were much higher than going back home and living with my parents. And right after college, I started subbing for the school system, and I did that for about 2 weeks. And most people don't believe this, but I actually got hired wearing a pair of boat shoes, jeans, and a t-shirt. The CEO of the bank, his father was a superintendent when I started second grade. The vice chairman of the board of directors knew my mother. And I was visiting with the vice chairman one afternoon. He asked, had I applied for a job at the bank? And I told him yes. So he picks up the phone, he calls the CEO, and I'm talking to the CEO, and I said, well, I need to go home and change. He says, no, we've had a relationship with you for a very long time. The clothes don't make the person. Come straight on down to the bank. I went down to the bank, had the interview, and was hired that afternoon.
Wow. I think that's a really good segue into this conversation of relationships. I mean, because you had a relationship with him, you could show up dressed as you were. You even got the invite to come down because of the relationship. And I know a lot of times we feel that if we're presented the right way and everything that, hey, it'll just happen for us, especially when we, think about even from a paperwork side, if we want to apply for something in the bank and we just come and do But isn't there a relationship aspect to banking? They say that you should have a great relationship with your banker. You should have a relationship with a loan officer before you need a loan. Is that true? And if so, how do we build that?
Relationships are very important, but it's also important in how you present yourself in everyday living. I would encourage anyone, if you get a paycheck, whether it's once a month, every 2 weeks, periodically walk into the bank that you do business with and introduce yourself to someone. Bankers are trained to cross-sell. And so if you go in and you establish relationship, whether it's a teller, a customer service rep, today we have universal bankers, but introduce yourself to someone, but make it purposeful. Every week, go into the bank, even if it's just to check a balance, make a deposit, get to know the person in the bank, because you never know when you're going to need a banking relationship.
Yeah. I know for myself, being CEO and founder of a med tech startup, I have a loan officer at a bank. And, and even just simple things like when I am on the phone talking to the loan officer, even in my email communication, I even advise my staff, when you send an email to this particular individual, I want flowers and candy in the language. I want, and so I ask intentional questions about their family life. I share with them so that we can build more of a relationship, so that when I'm calling, like for the PPP loan, we actually end up receiving that. And a large part of that was being able to call that representative at the bank I already had a relationship with, and to say, hey, we're here. Please don't let our application get to the bottom of the pile somehow. And they have a lot of pressures as a banker, I can imagine.
It's very important because relationships are key. And when you have a lot of issues coming at you day in and day out, and as a business owner or even as a consumer, having that relationship goes a long way. For me, I started my first banking relationship at age 12 by opening up a savings account. This summer, before I started with Republic Bank, I had a business transaction with the bank in my hometown. I picked up the phone. Everything was done electronically, including signing documents. It was done in 30 minutes over the phone. But because of a relationship that spans back some 40-something years, it was easy to do this transaction over the phone. Mm-hmm. And so I try to get out and meet customers. I try to get out and meet people in the community just to introduce myself, because life moments can happen at any time. And for example, you mentioned the PPP program, very intense time for the industry and for small business owners all over the country. And a lot of individuals were challenged because they could not get through to someone on the phone. But having a relationship, but also I think it's incumbent upon the banker to reach out to those in the community and try to assist them, especially in the communities where you're doing business.
Wow. And I love that you mentioned, banking digitally. Even with that, I know for myself, I have several banks that I work with for different reasons, each one. And one of them that I work with, I have times when I want to do something that traditionally would be done in person, but because again of that relationship, they know who I am. They know the sound of my voice. They know. So because they have that, there's a little bit of leeway sometimes, and maybe some of the more rigid rules in terms of doing remote banking. Whereas if I was somebody else and I didn't have a relationship with them, I would have to drive an hour and a half, go into the branch, and to get this done. But they now know, and not even me personally, but even my team, I had them form a relationship where they could be almost the first vetting process, and they say, okay, well, we're going to call Angelique just to confirm that this is real. And that way it helps take the load off of me. So I think relationships are critical, even in the digital thing. Would you agree with that? Or
I agree completely. And, just the simple things of life. For those who drink coffee, you may go by your favorite coffee shop every morning, and the folks at the coffee shop know you. You use a particular dry cleaners. The people there know you. Men and women go to the barbershop, hair salon. You form those relationships, and those relationships are important to you. Your banking and your financial relationship should be just as important. I have a son who's 26 years old, and I don't think he's been inside of a brick and mortar building more than 3 times in the last 12 months. I'm from the old school. I still like talking with people and shaking hands, obviously, but in this era, we're not shaking hands. But going in and talking with someone, it's the price of a relationship. You can't put a cost on it. It's so important.
Wow. Now, the bank, we talked about banking in person, banking digitally. You might have banks for different reasons. Can you talk about what are, should we be diversified in our banks, or should we really just bank with one company and ones to think about that might have us diversify the number of banks that we work with, or reasons why you might not want to be with just one bank?
That's a very important question. It's a very good question. I'll use myself as an example. I mentioned my hometown, Hinesville, Georgia. I've had a banking relationship there since I was 12 years old. My son lives in another state. When he moved, I suggested to him that he open up a banking account close to where he lives or work. He also has an account here in Louisville. And so if he needs something while he's living in another state, he can go by the banking center there, or he can call here in Louisville and establish that relationship, or call on that relationship that's been established since he was in college.
When it comes to accessing capital, I know another concern in terms of banking is, I'll take my company again as an example. We have a large bank that we work with because they have great online services. We can do bill pay, everything's top notch in terms of that. We never go into a branch. I haven't been in a branch in years. But then when it came time to get a loan for our company, to get a small business loan, we intentionally went with a smaller bank with the contractors that we were working with. So they knew kind of what our revenue model looked like. They knew how to deal with a company like us. They're very particular to that. And so we actually went with that smaller bank. They know, it's not like cheating.
Exactly.
We process the loan through there, and we tell them at the end of the processing, please wire all that money to our other bank. It feels a little dirty sometimes, but everybody's on board with it. And so, it seems like there are some better opportunities in terms of relationship building, depending on what you're looking for.
And with anything, and we've said it before, knowing someone inside of the bank, you're on vacation, your wallet's stolen. It's easy to pick up the phone and call, and there's an 800 number that you can call. But that sense of security of being able to call and hear a familiar voice on the end that tells you, don't worry about it, we've taken care of it. That is so important.
Now, another thing that I want to get at, certainly tonight, is the role of the banking industry and the role of how we can kind of leverage those relationships in terms of the wealth gap. Now, of course, we all know that there's that we see in Black and brown communities compared to white communities in terms of wealth. That's not income, although there's an income gap as well, but that's in terms of assets that are maintained and controlled at the systemic level. But certainly with Wealth Builder Movement, we're really trying to figure out how can we individually as a community move the needle in the wealth gap. Now, how can banks be leveraged to kind of, on an individual, on a community level, to move that and close that wealth gap as much as we can, even if it's for our family?
Banking has changed so much since I began my career. When I had 14,500 banks in the country, now we're closer to 4,600, and that's a 69% decline. That all of us face is learning how to adapt and use technology, and that has been a major driver. But in terms of the wealth gap, I go back to just basic tackle and blocking issues. All of us were told as kids, if you get an allowance, save some and spend some. For me, one of the most exciting times of the year is that period between January 31st and March the 31st, because millions of Americans are filing tax returns. And for those individuals who are receiving a refund, in many households, especially Black and brown communities or in low-income communities, if someone's getting a large tax refund, maybe because of an earned income tax credit, there's no better time in the year to save. And I've always tried to encourage anyone getting a tax return of $1,000 or more, save half of it, spend 25% on a bill and 25% to take a vacation. Young couple or an individual, single parent, is receiving $5,000 over a 10-year period. And they're setting aside $2,500 a year over a 10-year period. Child's 1 now, they're 11 now. 7 more years before 18. Between 1 and 11, that's $25,000 before you add on interest. It sounds like a long period of time, but if you've asked anybody who's raised a child, it goes by very quickly. Yeah. And the 25% to my mother instilled in me and my brother and sister that if you work 12 months a year, take a vacation. Even if it's just down the street to the beach For us, it was just down the street to the beach to spend a weekend. It gives you a sense of worth, and it renews your spirit and it renews your energy to know that you've worked and you're able to take some time off. The 25% to pay bills is also important because you're teaching yourself to reduce debt. But it's just a simple math equation: save more than you spend, and over time it grows.
Wow. I want to make sure that we hit on a few other topics. And one thing you mentioned in terms of taking that money and putting away in savings, we know that as you're saving up money, at some point you're able to actually make an investment.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you and I have talked about how to invest, how to vet kind of real estate investment deals, because I know being in the banking industry, you see a lot of those deals come through, as well as, your own wealth building journey. So, many of our viewers, myself included, many people in the Black and Brown community want to participate in neighborhood revitalization. In Black and Brown communities, do investment with a greater purpose. Is there any advice that you would give for those that have kind of saved some money, enough money to say I can invest? Was there any advice you would give from a banking perspective, just from your lived experience?
Yes, the most important thing is to have a plan, know what you're doing, know the community. Do an inventory. Where do you want to invest? What are the growth opportunities? Who's going to be my tenant? If the property needs improvements, hire an inspector to inspect the property, and then hire reputable contractors to do the work for you. Those are the basics. The most important is know the community, know what you want to do, and know what type of return you want. Is it a financial return? Some of the purpose for you wanting to do what you're doing. And if you follow those just basic principles, over time, you can be successful.
And in terms of the wealth gap and our kind of individually we want to invest in real estate, and then, of course, we have other stock market investments, which we probably won't go too much into tonight. But the other aspect that has really been kind of a buzz, and these things are seasonal, as you know. I mean, it's been a buzz since, since for a long time, for many decades, is the concept of the Black banking industry. Another kind of node in the greater story of closing the wealth gap. If somebody is out there listening and they're wondering, is Black banking, can that be part of the wealth gap story? And if so, what are the things that we need to be aware of and thinking about to really contribute to making that successful for whoever's involved in that area?
Yeah, banking is a highly regulated industry, and in order to start a bank, it's like any other business. The regulatory agencies are going to want to see a business plan. They're going to want to see the bios of the people who are looking to start the bank. Who's going to be your board of directors? What type of experience do they bring to the table? Have you done a market analysis? This is a very large country, and if you look at where concentrations of Black and brown people are, especially in urban areas, because in rural parts of every state, you're not going to see Black areas. And so doing your homework, putting together a business plan, finding a group of like-minded individuals, because when you invest in a bank, it's just like investing in something, it's done for the long term. Your resources, and asking investors to believe in what you're doing. And so it's a long-term investment. And capital is key, because when you submit that application to the regulatory agencies, you've got to have enough capital to convince them that you can make this thing work over a period of time. And then finding the talent, the management to run the bank. Those are probably the most important factors there.
And in terms of us deciding like, hey, and I'm going to get a bank account at a Black bank. I know one thing that has just come up in conversation and dialogue among me and my peers is the concept of, do we have to get on board to really shift the needle in terms of Black banking? I mean, is it okay for 10 Black banks that pop up in the city of Louisville and for 5 people to put their money in it? Is that moving the needle? Or should we be thinking more collectively about, changing that area if that's an area that we want to go into?
Part of your market analysis for any business, banking included, if you're looking to, for example, if you're in the quick service industry, one of the major brands will probably not allow 10 franchisees to open up on the same block. Or the key is going to be with anything. If it's so concentrated with the number of banks in a specific geographic area, then obviously you're pursuing the same customers. And so there's no diversification there. And that's where that business plan and the market analysis is really going to come in and be a key factor. Banking, like any other thing, it's a personal choice. Can you get the service and the products that you're looking for? Can they meet your need? Digital banking and technology, are the services that I'm looking for, are they available? Those are critical, important factors. But I would encourage anyone, you support businesses that you believe in. And if you're willing to support institutions, then that's what you should do. But it's like any other business. You look for services, you look for products, you look for an institution whose vision and values align with yours. And to the extent they do, then it's an open opportunity.
I think we have to wrap up in one moment. So very briefly, I want to ask you this question. Faith and finances. I know you're a man of faith. You even teach some financial literacy courses in a church environment. Very briefly, how does faith affect your finances as a banker?
You know, I've always lived with these two words, faith and hope, in everything that I do. I've wanted to be a banker since I was 16. That takes something and seeing it before it's realized in front of you. Life teaches us that we're going to have ups and downs. And I've got a good golfing buddy, and he says, you know, life is like golf. You have ups and you have downs, but you have to remain even keeled. Never get too excited. Don't ever get too disappointed. Faith and hope and trusting and walking and being consistent. Those are the most important things.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Pedro, for joining us. I am so happy to have had you, and I certainly want to have you back again so we can continue this conversation. And again, I appreciate your time. Thank you all for joining us. Please stay tuned for our next. And as always, keep building wealth and stay a wealth builder.